The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. on Christmas night. I was sitting in my truck outside the Waffle House on Route 34, still wearing the burgundy dress I'd bought specifically for dinner at Mom's house. The caller ID showed Captain Martinez urgent. I almost didn't answer. My hands were still shaking from what had happened 3 hours earlier, when my own family looked me in the eye and told me I didn't belong at their table. But something about that word urgent made me swipe right. "Sarah?" Captain Martinez's voice was tight, professional. "We need you in Colorado Springs by 0600. There's been a development with the Hartwell situation." I stared at my reflection in the truck's side mirror. Mascara smudged, lipstick gone, eyes red from crying. "Sir, I'm on leave until January 3rd. "Not anymore, Lieutenant Commander. This is priority 1. How fast can you get to base?" That's when I realized something. For the first time in 6 hours, someone actually needed me. Not my money, not my connections, not my ability to fix everyone else's problems. They needed Sarah Mitchell, the person I'd worked 15 years to become. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The evening had started like every other Christmas for the past decade. I'd driven 4 hours from my apartment near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to the suburban house in Dayton where I grew up, carrying a cooler full of prime rib that cost me 3 days' pay and a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. My sister Jessica opened the door wearing a new sweater that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. "Oh, Sarah's here," she called over her shoulder, not to me, but to the room behind her. Like I was the pizza delivery guy. "You're late," Mom said, without looking up from her phone. She was sitting in Dad's old recliner, the one he'd claimed for 30 years before the heart attack took him last spring. "We already said grace." I checked my watch. 6:03 p.m. I was 3 minutes late. "Sorry, the traffic on I-75 was—" "It's fine," Jessica interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "Just put the food in the kitchen. Tommy's setting up the Xbox in the living room." Tommy, my nephew, Jessica's 17-year-old son who'd been suspended from school twice this semester for skipping class. The same kid I'd been sending $200 a month to for his college fund since he was 12. I carried the cooler through the dining room past the table set for 6 people. There was no place setting for me. The chairs were arranged around the table like they'd been choreographed. Mom at the head, Jessica and her husband Brad on one side, Tommy and his girlfriend Kaylee on the other. At the foot of the table, where Dad used to sit, was a stack of unopened Christmas cards. "Where should I?" I started. "Oh, just grab a TV tray from the closet," Jessica said, appearing in the doorway. "We didn't know if you were actually coming. You've been so busy with your military stuff." My military stuff. 15 years of service, 3 deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, and a promotion to Lieutenant Commander that I'd worked 70-hour weeks to earn. But to them it was just stuff. I found a TV tray in the hall closet, behind Dad's old coats that Mom still hadn't donated. The tray was wobbly, missing one of the rubber feet. I set it up next to the couch, far enough from the dining table that I couldn't hear their conversation without straining. "Sarah, can you help me with the gravy?" Mom called. I stood up, smoothing my dress. This was familiar territory. "Sarah, fix the gravy." "Sarah, run to the store for more rolls." "Sarah, take the trash out before you leave." I'd been the unofficial kitchen staff at family gatherings since I was old enough to reach the stove. In the kitchen, Mom was standing over a pot of lumpy, gray liquid that looked more like concrete mix than gravy. "I can't get it to thicken," she said, frustration creeping into her voice. "Your father always helped with this part." I took the whisk from her hands and began working the gravy, adding flour gradually, the way Dad had taught me when I was 10. We worked in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the gentle scraping of the whisk against the pot. "How's work?" she asked eventually. "Good. We're working on a new reconnaissance program. I can't really—" "That's nice, honey." She was already walking away, attention already elsewhere. "Can you finish that up? We're ready to eat." I stood there stirring gravy for people who couldn't be bothered to wait 3 minutes for me to arrive, feeling like a caterer at my own family's Christmas dinner. Through the doorway I could see them all seated around the table, passing dishes and filling wine glasses. Nobody had thought to pour one for me. When I finally joined them, balancing a plate of food on my wobbly TV tray, the conversation was in full swing. Brad was telling a story about his recent promotion to regional manager at the insurance company, gesturing with his fork as he described his new office. "It's got a view of the river," he was saying. "Real executive stuff. Corner office, secretary, company car." "That's wonderful," Mom said, beaming. "Such a hard worker." I took a bite of the prime rib I'd spent half my grocery budget on and tried to follow the conversation. They moved from Brad's promotion to Tommy's plans for college, which I was apparently still funding, to Kaylee's job at the local Starbucks, which she described as super challenging, to Jessica's new business venture selling essential oils online. "It's really taking off," Jessica was saying. "I made almost $300 last month." "That's incredible," Mom replied. "An entrepreneur in the family." I nearly choked on my wine. $300 was what I'd sent Tommy just last week for his emergency car repair. But Jessica was getting praised for making the same amount in a month selling overpriced lavender oil to her Facebook friends. "What about you, Sarah?" Kaylee asked suddenly. "What's new with you?" All eyes turned to me. I set down my fork, thinking about how to explain that I'd just finished a 6-month assignment developing new surveillance protocols for overseas operations, that I'd been working with teams from NASA and the Pentagon, that I'd received a commendation from my commanding officer just last week. "Well, I've been working on—" "Oh, that reminds me," Jessica interrupted. "Tommy needs help with his college applications. The essays are due next week." "I can help with that," I said. "I've reviewed hundreds of military academy applications." "Actually," Brad cut in, "we hired a professional consultant, someone who specializes in college admissions. It's better to have an expert handle it." An expert? I had 2 master's degrees, had been accepted to the Naval War College, had written training manuals that were used across 3 branches of the military. But I wasn't an expert. "That's probably better," Mom agreed. "Those military applications are different from regular college ones." Regular college ones. As if the United States Air Force Academy was some kind of vocational school. The conversation moved on without me again. I ate in silence, listening to them discuss vacation plans. A cruise to the Caribbean that I apparently wasn't invited to, holiday parties that I hadn't been told about, and family gossip about relatives I rarely heard from unless they needed something. "Remember when Dad used to carve the turkey?" Tommy said suddenly. "He'd make such a big deal about it." "He loved Christmas," Mom said quietly. "Always said it was about bringing the family together." There was a moment of silence, the first real quiet since I'd arrived. I thought about Dad, how he'd always made sure I felt included, how he'd ask about my work and actually listen to the answers. He'd been gone 8 months now, and I was still learning how much he'd been my bridge to the rest of them. "He'd be proud of all of us," Jessica said, reaching across the table to squeeze Mom's hand. "Look at what we've accomplished. Brad's promotion, Tommy getting into college, my business taking off." She looked around the table, her gaze touching everyone except me. "We're all doing so well." I stared at her, waiting for her to remember that I was sitting 6 feet away, that I'd been deployed to Afghanistan twice, that I'd earned my rank through merit and dedication, that I'd been supporting this family financially for years. But the moment passed, and she turned back to Brad, asking him about his new company car. That's when I understood. I wasn't part of all of us. I was the silent partner, the one who provided the money that made their accomplishments possible, but who didn't count as accomplishing anything myself. "I need to use the bathroom," I said, standing abruptly. Nobody looked up. I walked down the hallway to the bathroom I'd used as a child, past the photos lining the walls. There were pictures of Jessica's wedding, Tommy's high school graduation, family vacations, birthday parties. I searched for myself in the frames, finding only glimpses. A hand on someone's shoulder, part of my face in a group shot, always on the edge, always partially cut off. In the bathroom mirror, I looked at myself. The burgundy dress I'd bought for tonight, the pearl earrings that had been Dad's last Christmas gift to me, the makeup I'd applied carefully because I'd wanted to look nice for them. I looked like I was dressed for a date, not dinner with my family, empty. When I returned to the dining room, they were discussing dessert. Mom had made her famous apple pie, the one she'd been perfecting for 20 years. The one I'd been bringing ingredients for since I started earning a paycheck. "Sarah, can you help me serve?" Mom asked. I walked to the kitchen where the pie sat cooling on the counter. Next to it was a stack of dessert plates, 6 of them, china ones with little holly leaves around the edges. I counted again. 6 plates for 6 people, not including me. "Mom," I said quietly, "did you forget to set a place for me?" She looked at the plates, then at me, then back at the plates. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry. We weren't sure if you were staying for dessert. You usually leave pretty early." I usually left early because I usually felt like I was intruding. But I'd never realized they'd structured the entire evening around my absence. "I can get another plate," she said, reaching for the cabinet. "Don't worry about it," I said. "I should probably get going anyway. Are you sure? It's still early." I looked at the clock on the microwave. 8:15 p.m. I'd been there for 2 hours and 15 minutes, and I'd spoken maybe 50 words. Most of those had been, "Excuse me," and "Thank you." "Yeah, I'm sure." I walked back to the dining room, where they were all laughing at something Tommy had said. The sound was warm and genuine, the kind of laughter that comes from people who are comfortable with each other, who belong together. "I'm heading out," I announced. "Already?" Jessica looked up, surprised. "But we haven't done presents yet." Presents. I'd spent 3 hours shopping for gifts for each of them, trying to find things that showed I'd been paying attention to their lives. A cashmere scarf for Mom in her favorite color. A book about entrepreneurship for Jessica. A new gaming headset for Tommy. A bottle of Brad's favorite bourbon. "I left them in the truck," I said. "I'll bring them by tomorrow." "Oh, okay." Jessica's attention was already drifting back to the table. "Drive safe." "Thanks for dinner, Mom." "Of course, honey. It was so nice to have you here." Nice to have me here. Like I was a guest, not her daughter. I got my coat from the closet and walked toward the door, past the dining room where they were dividing up the pie. Nobody got up to walk me out. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody seemed to notice that I was leaving without saying goodbye to anyone except Jessica and Mom. I stood in the foyer for a moment, looking back at the warm lights spilling from the dining room, listening to their voices blend together in easy conversation. This was what family was supposed to sound like. This was what I'd been trying to be part of for 34 years. But I wasn't part of it. I was the person who made it possible. The one who paid for the groceries, covered the emergency repairs, sent the college fund money. I was the foundation they'd built their family on, but I wasn't part of the structure itself. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cold December air. Behind me, I could hear Tommy telling another story, something about school that had them all laughing. The sound followed me down the driveway, getting fainter with each step until it was just another house with warm windows and people inside who belonged to each other. That's when I sat in my truck outside the Waffle House, still in my burgundy dress, and tried to figure out what I'd done wrong. What I'd said or didn't say. What I'd brought or didn't bring. What I'd accomplished or failed to accomplish, that had made me so invisible to the people who were supposed to know me best. I was still trying to figure it out when Captain Martinez called. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Sarah, I need you to understand something," Captain Martinez said over the phone. "This isn't just about Hartwell anymore. We've got 3 missing contractors and a communication blackout from the entire Colorado facility." I sat up straighter in my truck, the Christmas dinner disaster suddenly feeling like a distant memory. "What kind of contractors?" "The kind that don't officially exist. Look, I know you're supposed to be on leave, but you designed the security protocols for that facility. You're the only one who knows the system inside and out." As he spoke, I found myself thinking about something Dad used to say when I was struggling through flight school. "Sarah, some people are born to follow, some are born to lead, and some are born to be the bridge that holds everything together." Tonight, I'd felt like I was the bridge my family walked over without ever looking down. But this call reminded me that in my real life, my professional life, I wasn't invisible. I was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, and I was exactly where I belonged. "I'll be there in 6 hours," I told him. "Make it 4 if you can." "And Sarah?" "Pack for cold weather. We might be heading north." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my truck, processing what had just happened. 3 hours ago, I'd been begging for a place at my own family's table. Now the United States Air Force was calling me back from leave because they needed me specifically. Not my money, not my connections, not my ability to fix everyone else's problems. They needed my expertise. I started the engine and began the drive back to Wright-Patterson, but my mind kept drifting to how I'd gotten here. How I'd become the person my family only called when they needed something, but who the military called when something critical was falling apart. It started 7 years ago, right after I made captain. Dad had his first heart episode. Not the big one that killed him, but the warning shot that should have changed everything. I was stationed at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, working on classified communication systems, when Mom called crying. "The hospital bills," she'd sobbed into the phone. "Insurance won't cover everything. We're looking at $30,000, maybe more." I was making good money then, but $30,000 was still a significant chunk of my savings. I didn't hesitate. I wired the money that afternoon, then worked double shifts for the next 3 months to replenish my emergency fund. "You're a lifesaver," Dad had said when I called to check on him. I don't know what we would have done, but they never asked what I'd done. They never asked if I could afford it, if it would put me in a difficult position, if I had other plans for that money. They just assumed I'd handle it, the way you assume the sun will rise. If USC, that became the pattern. When Jessica's marriage started falling apart 2 years later, I was the one who paid for her counseling sessions. When Tommy needed a car for his 16th birthday, I was the one who co-signed the loan. When Brad got laid off during the pandemic, I was the one who covered their mortgage for 4 months. Each time, it was presented as a temporary emergency. Each time, I was told how much it meant to them. Each time, I was promised they'd pay me back when things got better. Things never got better. Or rather, they got better for everyone except me, because I was the one absorbing all the shocks that might have disrupted their lives. Gaia. The worst part wasn't the money. I made decent money, and I'd always been good at managing my finances. The worst part was how it changed the way they saw me. I went from being Jessica's little sister to being the family's financial backup plan. I went from being Tommy's aunt to being his emergency ATM. I remember the exact moment I realized how bad it had gotten. It was Tommy's 18th birthday last year. The whole family had gathered at Mom's house, and Tommy was opening his presents. Jessica had given him a watch, a nice one that probably cost $200. Brad had given him a leather jacket. Mom had given him a savings bond. When he got to my gift, a check for $500 to help with college expenses, he barely looked at it. "Thanks, Aunt Sarah," he said, already moving on to the next present. Later, I overheard Jessica talking to one of her friends on the phone. "Yeah, Sarah takes care of all that stuff," she was saying. "College costs, car payments, whatever. It's nice having someone in the family who's financially stable." Financially stable, like I was a bank, not a person. But even then, I didn't fully understand what was happening until Dad's funeral 8 months ago. I'd flown in from a deployment in Qatar, still jet-lagged and emotionally raw from losing him. The funeral was beautiful, exactly what he would have wanted. The reception afterward was at the church, and I found myself standing alone near the food table, watching my family accept condolences from friends and neighbors. "Your father was so proud of you," Mrs. Henderson from next door said to me. "He always talked about your military service." "Thank you," I said. "He was proud of all of us." She looked confused. "Well, yes, but you were special. My daughter the officer," he used to say. "She's the one who keeps us all together." I felt tears starting to well up, the first real emotions I'd felt all day. "He said that?" "Oh, all the time. He'd tell anyone who'd listen about your medals, your promotions, how you were making a difference in the world." She paused. "He worried about you, though." "Worried about me?" "He said you gave too much of yourself to everyone else, that you were so busy taking care of everyone, you forgot to take care of yourself." I stood there, holding a paper plate with church casserole, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Dad had seen what I was doing to myself, and he'd been worried about it. But he'd never said anything to me directly. After the funeral, there was the will reading. I'd helped Dad update it 2 years earlier, during another health scare. I'd driven him to the lawyer's office, helped him organize his documents, made sure everything was in order. I knew Jessica would inherit the house, which made sense. She had kids. She needed stability. What I didn't expect was the conversation afterward. The lawyer said there's about $15,000 in Dad's savings account, Jessica said as we stood in Mom's kitchen. But there's also some credit card debt. About $8,000. I did the math quickly. So there's $7,000 left. Well, that's before the funeral expenses. The casket, the flowers, the reception, it all adds up. How much? $12,000. I stared at her. So the estate is $5,000 in the red. Yeah. She looked uncomfortable. I know it's not ideal, but... But what? Well, you're the one with the stable income. And you don't have kids or a mortgage or anything. I felt something cold settle in my chest. You want me to cover Dad's funeral expenses? It's not want, it's just practical. You're the only one who can. I paid for Dad's funeral. I paid for the casket he was buried in, the flowers that decorated his grave, the reception where people told stories about how wonderful he was. I paid for it all while Jessica inherited his house and Mom kept his life insurance money. And nobody thought that was strange. They all just assumed I'd handle it the way I'd handled everything else. Standing in that kitchen, writing a check for my father's funeral while my sister planned what to do with his house, I finally understood what had happened to me. I'd become the person who made everyone else's life possible, but who wasn't quite part of the life I was making possible. Polakai. It wasn't malicious. They didn't sit around plotting how to take advantage of me. It was just easier to let me handle things. It was easier to assume I'd cover the emergency expenses, manage the crisis situations, absorb the financial shocks that might have disrupted their more fragile lives. And I'd enabled it. Every time I said don't worry about it, when they couldn't pay me back. Every time I said it's no problem, when they asked for help. Every time I prioritized their needs over my own boundaries, I was teaching them that I was the family's safety net, not its daughter. The drive back to base took me through small towns decorated for Christmas, past houses with lights in the windows and cars in driveways. Normal families having normal Christmas evenings, probably arguing about football games and politics and whose turn it was to do the dishes. Problems that would be forgotten by morning. I thought about my apartment on base, small and efficient and entirely mine. No one had ever lived there except me. No one had ever asked me to pay for anything except my own needs. It was the first place I'd ever lived where I wasn't responsible for anyone else's problems. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it while stopped at a red light. Mom, hope you got home safe. Thanks for coming tonight. I stared at the message, wondering if she was waiting for me to respond. If she expected me to thank her for having me, or to apologize for leaving early, or to ask if I could help clean up tomorrow. I turned off my phone and kept driving. By the time I reached Wright-Patterson, it was after midnight. The base was quiet, most of the buildings dark except for the essential operations that never stopped. I parked in front of my apartment building and sat for a moment, looking up at the windows of my fourth-floor unit. Inside, I had a Christmas tree. A small one, just 3 feet tall, decorated with ornaments I'd collected from places I'd been stationed. Germany, Qatar, South Korea, Colorado. Each ornament represented a time in my life when I'd been valued for what I could do, not what I could provide. I grabbed my go bag from the closet and started packing for cold weather, as Captain Martinez had instructed. Thermal underwear, wool socks, insulated gloves, the kind of gear that meant we were heading somewhere remote and potentially dangerous. As I packed, I thought about the contrast between tonight and what was coming. Tonight, I'd sat at a wobbly TV tray, eating prime rib I'd paid for, while my family talked around me like I wasn't there. Tomorrow, I'd be briefing senior officers on security protocols I'd designed, making decisions that could affect national security. Tonight, I was the family member they forgot to set a place for. Tomorrow, I'd be the expert they couldn't proceed without. Brunter his. I finished packing and set my alarm for 04:00. 4 hours of sleep, then back to the world where I wasn't invisible, where my rank meant something, where people said Lieutenant Commander when they addressed me, instead of Sarah, can you help with? As I lay in bed, I thought about what Dad had said about being a bridge. Maybe he was right. Maybe some people were born to hold things together. But bridges were meant to be crossed, not lived on. And after tonight, I was starting to understand the difference. The alarm went off at 04:00, but I was already awake. I'd been lying in bed for the past hour, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Captain Martinez's words. 3 missing contractors, and a communication blackout from the entire Colorado facility. The Colorado facility. That was my baby. I'd spent 18 months designing the security protocols for that place, working with teams from the NSA, CIA, and private defense contractors to create something that was supposed to be impenetrable. If something had gone wrong there, it wasn't just a security breach. It was a catastrophic failure of systems I'd personally guaranteed. I showered quickly and grabbed my gear. The drive to the main building took less than 5 minutes, but the base was already buzzing with activity. Emergency vehicles, personnel moving with purpose, the kind of controlled chaos that meant something big was happening. Captain Martinez was waiting for me in the briefing room, along with Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base commander, and 2 people I didn't recognize. A woman in an expensive suit and a man in civilian clothes who had the kind of posture that screamed intelligence community. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, Colonel Hayes said as I entered. Thank you for cutting your leave short. Of course, ma'am. I set my gear down and took a seat at the conference table. What's the situation? The woman in the suit leaned forward. I'm Director Amanda Chen, NSA. This is Agent Robert Torres, CIA. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. She slid a tablet across the table to me. On the screen was a satellite image of the Colorado facility, a compound nestled in the mountains about 60 miles west of Colorado Springs. It looked normal from above. A collection of buildings surrounded by forest, a landing strip, a few vehicles parked in the lot. At 1,800 hours yesterday, we lost all communication with the facility, Director Chen continued. No radio, no satellite uplink, no internet. Complete blackout. I studied the image more carefully. What about the automated systems, the security cameras, the motion sensors? Everything's down. But here's the strange part. The power grid is still active. The facility is drawing electricity, but nothing is transmitting out. Agent Torres spoke up. We sent a reconnaissance drone over the area at 02:00. The vehicles are still there, but we've seen no movement. No personnel outside the buildings, no activity of any kind. And the missing contractors? Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, Dr. James Kim, and Dr. Maria Santos, Captain Martinez said. They're part of a classified research team working on advanced communication systems. They were scheduled to check in yesterday at 1,900 hours. They never made contact. I felt my chest tighten. I knew all 3 of those names. Dr. Hartwell was a brilliant cryptographer who'd worked with me on the facility's encryption protocols. Dr. Kim was a signals intelligence expert who'd helped design the communication arrays. Dr. Santos was a cybersecurity specialist who'd consulted on the firewall systems. What's the working theory? I asked. Director Chen and Agent Torres exchanged glances. We're considering several possibilities, Chen said carefully. Equipment failure, weather interference, potential security breach. You think someone got inside? We think someone got inside and is still there, Torres said. The facility was designed to be completely self-contained in case of emergency. If someone took control of the internal systems, they could potentially lock it down from the inside. I set the tablet down and looked around the table. You need me to get in there. We need you to get us in there, Colonel Hayes corrected. You designed the security protocols. You know the facility better than anyone. If there's a way to breach the lockdown, you'll find it. What's the timeline? We fly out in 2 hours, Captain Martinez said. There's a military transport waiting at Peterson Air Force Base. We'll land at a forward operating base about 30 miles from the facility, then proceed on foot. Weather conditions? Blizzard warning for the next 48 hours. Temperature dropping to -20. Visibility near zero. I nodded, my mind already shifting into tactical mode. This was what I'd trained for. What I'd spent 15 years preparing for. Not Christmas dinners where I was invisible. Not family emergencies where I was the designated problem solver. This was real work. Important work. The kind of mission that could affect national security. I'll need the original blueprints, I said. The ones with the classified modifications, not the sanitized versions. Already loaded on your secure tablet, Torres said. And I'll need access to the facility's construction records. Every contractor, every modification, every system upgrade. Done. What about backup protocols? If the main systems are compromised, there should be secondary. That's what we're counting on you to tell us, Director Chen interrupted. You built those protocols. You're the only one who knows how to activate them. As they continued briefing me on the mission details, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of being truly needed. Not needed to write a check or solve a family crisis, but needed for my expertise, my knowledge, my skills. Novices. It reminded me of why I joined the military in the first place. Ihamio. I was 22, fresh out of college with a degree in electrical engineering, and no real plan for my life. Dad had suggested I look into the Air Force, said they needed people with technical skills. Plus, he'd said, you've always been good at figuring out how things work. Basic training was hell, but it was the kind of hell that made sense. Every challenge had a purpose, every requirement had a reason. When I succeeded, it was because I'd earned it. When I failed, it was because I needed to work harder. Most importantly, when I contributed to something, I was recognized for it. When I solved a problem, people noticed. When I went above and beyond, it was acknowledged and rewarded. The first time I received a commendation, I called Dad to tell him about it. They said my analysis of the communication system identified a vulnerability that could have been exploited, I'd told him excitedly. That's my girl, he'd said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. Making a difference. Making a difference. That's what I'd been doing for 15 years, and I'd been good at it. Really good at it. Good enough that they'd trusted me to design security protocols for one of the most sensitive facilities in the country. Lieutenant Commander? Captain Martinez's voice brought me back to the present. Any questions about the mission parameters? I looked around the table at these people who'd called me back from leave. Because they needed me specifically. Not because I was convenient, not because I was available, but because I was the best person for the job. No questions, I said. I'm ready. Good. Gear up and meet at the transport in 90 minutes. As the meeting broke up, Colonel Hayes approached me. Sarah, I want you to know that this assignment could have significant career implications. If you succeed, it'll be noticed at the highest levels. If you fail, I understand, ma'am. I don't think you do. She lowered her voice. The facility in Colorado isn't just a research installation. It's a critical node in our national defense network. If it's been compromised, if the wrong people have access to the systems you designed, we could be looking at a security breach that affects multiple agencies. I felt the weight of that responsibility settling on my shoulders. I won't let you down. I know you won't. That's why we called you. I gathered my gear and headed back to my apartment to collect the specialized equipment I'd need for the mission. As I packed, I thought about the contrast between this morning and last night. 24 hours ago, I'd been standing outside my family's house, trying to figure out why I felt so invisible. Now, I was preparing for a mission that could affect national security, surrounded by people who valued my expertise and trusted my judgment. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it while checking my equipment list. Jessica, Mom's worried about you. You left so suddenly last night. Everything okay? I stared at the message for a moment, then turned off my phone without responding. In 3 hours, I'd be flying toward a crisis that required my immediate attention. I had no time for family drama, no mental space for people who only noticed me when I wasn't there. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd been the one they called when they had emergencies. Now I had a real emergency, and they were worried about my feelings. I finished packing and headed to the transport. The plane was a military cargo aircraft, configured for personnel transport. Captain Martinez was already aboard, along with a team of specialists, communications experts, tactical personnel, medical support. Everyone had been briefed on the mission, everyone knew their role. As we took off, I looked out the window at the lights of Dayton disappearing below us. Somewhere down there, my family was probably having breakfast, discussing what to do with the leftover Christmas ham, making plans for the weekend. They'd probably mention that I'd seemed upset when I left, wonder if they should call me, maybe decide to give me some space to get over it. They had no idea that I was flying toward a classified facility in the Colorado mountains, that I was about to attempt something that could either save or destroy my career, that I was exactly where I belonged. The flight took 4 hours. I spent most of it reviewing the facility blueprints, memorizing every detail of the security systems I'd designed. The main building was a 3-story structure built into the side of a mountain, with underground levels that housed the most sensitive equipment. The communications array was on the roof, the power systems were in the basement, and the main computer core was in the center of the building, surrounded by multiple layers of security. If someone had taken control of the facility, they would have had to breach at least 6 different security protocols, each one designed to be independent of the others. The fact that all communication had been cut off suggested either a complete system failure or someone with intimate knowledge of how the systems worked. As we approached Peterson Air Force Base, Captain Martinez came over to brief me on the next phase of the mission. "We'll transfer to helicopters for the final approach," he said. "But the weather's getting worse. We may have to land further from the target than planned." "How much further?" "Possibly 10 to 15 miles. In blizzard conditions." I nodded. I'd trained for this kind of operation, but I had never done it under these conditions. The combination of extreme weather, unknown hostiles, and the pressure to succeed was unlike anything I'd faced before. But as I looked around the plane at the team of professionals who were depending on me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. 24 hours ago, I'd been invisible at my own family's Christmas dinner. Now I was leading a mission that could save 3 lives and protect national security. The difference was that these people saw me for who I really was. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, expert in communications security, the person they called when everything was falling apart, and they needed someone who could fix it. Not because I was convenient, but because I was the best. The helicopter ride to the forward operating base was a nightmare of wind, snow, and turbulence. I sat strapped into a jump seat, watching the mountains of Colorado emerge and disappear through the swirling white outside the windows. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom every few minutes with weather updates, each one worse than the last. "Visibility down to 50 feet, he reported as we descended toward the landing zone. "Wind gusts up to 45 miles per hour. "This is about as bad as it gets, people." Captain Martinez, sitting across from me, had to shout to be heard over the roar of the rotors. "We may have to postpone the approach until the storm passes." I shook my head. Every hour we wait is another hour those contractors might be in danger. And if someone has compromised the facility, they're using this storm as cover. Through my headset, I heard Agent Torres's voice. "Mitchell's right. We can't afford to wait." The helicopter touched down hard on a makeshift landing pad carved out of the snow. The forward operating base was barely more than a collection of prefabricated buildings and communication equipment, all of it struggling against the blizzard. We transferred our gear quickly and huddled into the command tent, where a team of analysts was monitoring the situation. "No change in the facility's status," reported Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the communications officer. "Still drawing power, still no outgoing signals, but we did pick up something interesting about an hour ago." She pulled up a spectrographic analysis on her computer screen. Brief radio transmission, lasted about 15 seconds. It was heavily encrypted, but we managed to isolate the frequency. I studied the data. "This is wrong." "What do you mean?" "This frequency. It's not part of the facility's communication array. It's much higher, more focused. This is the kind of signal you'd use for close-range, high-security communication." Captain Martinez leaned over my shoulder. "Like what?" "Like someone inside the facility communicating with someone outside. Someone who knows exactly what equipment they're working with." The implications hit me immediately. If someone was using the facility's own equipment to communicate with outside contacts, It meant they weren't just trapped inside. They were actively operating some kind of mission from within. "We need to move now," I said, "before they finish whatever they're doing." The team assembled quickly. Besides Captain Martinez and myself, we had Sergeant First Class Marcus Johnson, a communications specialist, Corporal Diana Walsh, a medic, and Staff Sergeant Kevin Liu, our tactical expert. Agent Torres had insisted on coming along, despite having minimal field experience. "Remember," Torres said as we geared up, "our primary objective is to secure the facility and rescue the contractors. But if we encounter evidence of espionage or sabotage, that takes precedence." I strapped on my tactical vest and checked my equipment one more time. GPS unit, encrypted radio, climbing gear, and my specialized tablet loaded with all the facility's technical specifications. Most importantly, I carried the emergency override codes that could potentially unlock the security systems, if they hadn't been compromised. The storm was getting worse. Snow whipped around us as we left the forward base, and within minutes I could barely see the person in front of me. We moved in single file, each of us connected to the next by a safety line, following a GPS bearing toward the facility. The terrain was brutal. The mountains were steep and covered in loose snow that shifted unpredictably under our feet. Every step required careful attention. Every movement had to be calculated. This was exactly the kind of approach I'd trained for during winter warfare exercises, but I'd never done it under operational conditions. "Hold up," Sergeant Johnson's voice crackled over the radio. "I'm getting interference on the GPS." We stopped and huddled together while he worked on the problem. The wind was so loud I could barely hear him, even standing 3 feet away. "Something's jamming the signal," he reported. "It's not natural interference. This is deliberate." I felt my stomach drop. "They know we're coming." "How is that possible?" Torres asked. "The facility has long-range sensors," I explained. "If someone's taken control of the security systems, they can track movement for miles in every direction." Staff Sergeant Leo was already scanning the area with his rifle scope. "We need to assume we're being watched. Change of plan. We approach from the east instead of the north." The detour added 2 hours to our journey. 2 hours of fighting through waist-deep snow and wind that felt like it was trying to tear us apart. By the time we reached the facility's perimeter, I was exhausted and my hands were numb despite the insulated gloves. The compound looked exactly like it had in the satellite photos, but something felt wrong. The buildings were dark, which made sense if someone was trying to avoid detection. But the parking lot should have had at least some snow accumulation, and it was completely clear. "Someone's been maintaining the grounds," I whispered into my radio. "The snow's been cleared recently." "How recently?" Martinez asked. I studied the patterns. "Within the last few hours. Maybe less." We moved to the main entrance, a reinforced steel door that required both keycard access and biometric verification. I pulled out my tablet and accessed the security system remotely. "The main systems are still active," I reported, "but they're locked down in emergency mode." Someone triggered the full lockdown protocol. "Can you override it?" I worked on the system for several minutes, trying different access codes and bypass procedures. Nothing worked. Whoever had triggered the lockdown had done it from inside, using administrator-level access. "We need to find another way in," I said finally. "What about the emergency exits?" Walsh suggested. "They're designed to be exit-only, no external access." "Maintenance entrances?" I thought about the facility's design. There's a service tunnel that connects to the power station. It's about half a mile east, built into the mountainside. We made our way through the storm to the power station, a smaller building that housed the facility's electrical systems. The service tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall, exactly as I'd designed it. "This is our way in," I said, pulling out the specialized tools I'd need to open the access panel. The tunnel was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for one person to crawl through. I went first, followed by Martinez, then the rest of the team. The tunnel ran for about 300 yards, sloping downward into the mountain. When we reached the facility end, I could hear something that made my blood freeze. Voices. Someone was talking in the room directly above us. I pressed my ear to the tunnel ceiling and listened carefully. 2 voices, both male, speaking in what sounded like Russian. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was businesslike, professional. "We've got hostiles inside," I whispered into my radio. "At least 2, possibly more. Can you identify them?" I listened for another minute. "Foreign nationals. They're speaking Russian, but they could be from anywhere in Eastern Europe. What about the contractors?" "No way to know without getting inside." The service tunnel ended at a maintenance room in the facility's basement. I carefully opened the access panel and peered into the room. Empty, but I could see light coming from under the door that led to the main corridor. We climbed out of the tunnel one by one, weapons ready. The maintenance room was exactly as I remembered it. Pipes, electrical panels, and the low hum of machinery. But there was something else. The smell of cigarette smoke. "Someone's been here recently," Leah whispered. I nodded and moved to the door. Through the small window, I could see the main corridor. It was dimly lit, but I could make out what looked like equipment that didn't belong. Computers, radio gear, cables running along the walls. "They've set up some kind of command center," I reported. "How many people are we dealing with?" "Unknown. But they're well equipped, and they know what they're doing." We moved into the corridor, staying close to the walls and communicating only through hand signals. The facility felt different than when I'd last been here. Colder, more hostile. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound could be a warning. Weoi. The main computer room was on the 2nd floor, and that's where we needed to go. If the contractors were still alive, they'd be held somewhere with good security but easy access to the systems. If the intruders were after classified information, they'd need access to the main servers. As we climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Dr. Hartwell's voice. "The encryption keys are stored in a separate system," she was saying. "You'll need administrator access to reach them." "Then you will provide administrator access," a male voice replied with a slight accent. "I can't do that. The system requires biometric verification from 2 authorized personnel. Then we will find the other personnel." I felt my heart racing. Dr. Hartwell was alive, but she was being forced to help the intruders access classified systems. If they got into the main database, they could steal information that would compromise national security for years. I turned to Martinez and held up 3 fingers, then pointed toward the computer room. 3 hostiles that we could hear, possibly more that we couldn't. He nodded and signaled to the rest of the team. We were going in. But as we prepared to breach the computer room, I realized something that changed everything. The voice that had been questioning Dr. Hartwell. I recognized it. Not the accent, but the speech pattern, the way he constructed his sentences. I'd heard that voice before, 2 years ago, during a security briefing at the Pentagon. It belonged to Dr. Viktor Petrov, a former Russian intelligence officer who'd supposedly defected to the United States. He'd been given access to classified information as part of his debriefing process. If Petrov was here, this wasn't just a security breach. This was a coordinated intelligence operation, planned and executed by someone with intimate knowledge of American security protocols. And I was the only person who knew enough about the facility's systems to stop him. Papo. As we prepared to enter the computer room, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of following the standard breach protocol, I was going to use my knowledge of the facility's hidden systems to trap the intruders inside. It was dangerous, potentially career-ending if I was wrong. But if I was right, I could prevent a catastrophic intelligence leak and save the lives of 3 American scientists. For the first time in my life, I was about to bet everything on my own expertise, my own judgment, my own value, as something more than just a problem solver. I was about to prove that Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell was exactly where she belonged. The maintenance corridor was darker than I'd expected. Our flashlights cut through the blackness, revealing concrete walls lined with pipes and electrical conduits. The facility's emergency lighting should have been active, but everything was dark except for the soft glow of indicator lights on various systems. "Power's still on," I whispered to Captain Martinez. "But they've disabled the standard lighting. They want us moving blind. Can you restore it?" I examined the electrical panel nearest to us. The switches were all in the correct positions, but the circuits had been manually disconnected. They've physically cut the connections. This isn't just a computer hack. Someone who knows the building's infrastructure did this. Sergeant Kim raised his rifle, scanning the corridor ahead. If they know we're here, why haven't they tried to stop us? Maybe they want us to get deeper into the building, Rodriguez suggested. Lead us into a trap. I studied the facility layout on my tablet. We were in the lower level, about 50 feet underground. The main computer core was 2 levels above us, and the communications center was on the roof. If the intruders were downloading classified data, they'd need access to both locations. There's something else, I said. Dr. Santos mentioned that Dr. Hartwell and Dr. Kim were trying to restore the backup systems when she left. Those systems are housed in the sub-basement, 1 level below us. You think they're still down there? If they're alive, that's where they'd be. The sub-basement has independent power and communication systems. It's designed to function even if the main building is compromised. Captain Martinez made the tactical decision. We split up. Rodriguez and Castellanos, you come with me to the computer core. Kim and Mitchell, you check the sub-basement for the missing personnel. Sir, I should go to the computer core, I said. I know those systems better than anyone. Negative. If Dr. Hartwell and Dr. Kim are alive, they'll need your expertise to restore the backup systems. Rodriguez has enough technical training to assist me with the main computers. I didn't like splitting up, but he was right. The backup systems were complex, and if the other researchers were trapped down there, they'd need help from someone who understood the facility's design. Sergeant Kim and I found the stairwell leading to the sub-basement. The door was locked, but not electronically. Someone had wedged it shut with a metal bar. I removed the bar and slowly opened the door. The sub-basement was a maze of server rooms and equipment storage, lit only by the pale glow of emergency lighting. As we descended the stairs, I could hear the low hum of computer systems running at full capacity. Dr. Hartwell? I called softly. Dr. Kim? This is Lieutenant Commander Mitchell. A voice responded from somewhere in the darkness. Sarah? Is that really you? Elizabeth, where are you? Server room C7. We're locked in. The door mechanism is jammed. I found the room using my facility map. The door was secured by an electronic lock that had been damaged. Not by accident, but deliberately. Someone had used a specialized tool to destroy the lock mechanism while leaving the door sealed. Stand back, I told the people inside. I connected my portable computer to the lock's diagnostic port and began running override protocols. The system was damaged, but not beyond repair. 10 minutes later, the door clicked open. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell emerged first, followed by Dr. James Kim. Both looked exhausted and stressed, but uninjured. Thank God, Dr. Hartwell said. We've been trapped in there for 18 hours. What happened? I asked. We were working late on the communication protocols when the main power went out, Dr. Kim explained. We came down here to initialize the backup systems, but someone followed us. They sealed us in and destroyed the lock mechanism. Did you see who it was? No, but we heard voices. At least 3 people, maybe more. They knew exactly where to find us, exactly how to trap us down here. I felt a chill of recognition. They knew the building layout that well? Better than that, Dr. Hartwell said grimly. They knew our work schedules, our protocols, our security procedures. Sarah, this was planned. Someone gave them detailed intelligence about our operations. The inside job angle was becoming more credible. Someone with access to classified information had provided the intruders with everything they needed to take control of the facility. Have you been able to restore any of the backup systems? I asked. Partially. We got the emergency communication array online, but it's limited range. We sent a distress signal, but we don't know if anyone received it. That was good news. If the emergency communication system was functional, we could contact the outside world and coordinate our escape. What about the main computer core? Sergeant Kim asked. Can you access it from down here? Limited access, Dr. Kim replied. We can see what's happening, but we can't control the systems. Whoever's running the show upstairs has locked us out of all the primary functions. I checked my watch. We'd been inside the facility for 45 minutes. If the intruders were downloading classified data, they'd already had hours to work. Every minute we delayed increased the potential security breach. I need to see what they're doing, I said. Can you show me the monitoring systems? Dr. Hartwell led me to a workstation that displayed real-time status information for the facility's computer networks. What I saw made my blood run cold. They're not just downloading data, I said. They're copying the entire database. Every classified research project, every communication protocol, every security procedure. If they succeed, they'll have complete access to our defense networks. How long do they need? At this rate, maybe 2 more hours. I studied the data transfer patterns, looking for weaknesses or vulnerabilities. The download was being managed by someone with intimate knowledge of the system architecture. They'd optimized the process to avoid detection by automated security protocols. There's something else, Dr. Kim said. We've been monitoring their communications. They're not just stealing data, they're preparing to destroy the facility when they're finished. Destroy it how? The facility has a self-destruct system designed to prevent sensitive information from falling into enemy hands. Someone's been accessing those controls. I felt the weight of the situation settling on my shoulders. This wasn't just a data theft. It was a comprehensive attack designed to steal our secrets and eliminate the evidence. If they succeeded, the damage to national security would be catastrophic. Can you disable the self-destruct system from down here? Not without access to the main computer core. The controls are hardwired to prevent exactly this kind of situation. I made a decision. I'm going upstairs. I need to get to the computer core and stop this. Sarah, that's suicide, Dr. Hartwell said. They'll be expecting you. Maybe. But I designed those systems. If anyone can find a way to shut them down, it's me. Sergeant Kim checked his weapon. I'll go with you. No, I need you to stay here and protect Dr. Hartwell and Dr. Kim. If something happens to me, they're the only ones who can operate the backup systems. Lieutenant Commander, I can't let you go alone. That's an order, Sergeant. I gathered my equipment and prepared to leave the sub-basement. As I reached the door, Dr. Hartwell called out to me. Sarah, there's something else you need to know. We think we know who the inside person is. I turned back. Who? We intercepted some of their communications. They mentioned someone codenamed Bridge. Someone who's been feeding them information for months. Bridge. The word hit me like a physical blow. It was the same term Dad had used to describe me. Some people are born to be the bridge that holds everything together. Did they say anything else about Bridge? Only that Bridge has access to the highest levels of classified information. Someone trusted. Someone who's been working on the facility's systems from the beginning. I felt sick. Someone in my position, someone with my level of access, had betrayed everything I'd worked for. The facility I'd helped design, the security protocols I'd created, the systems I'd spent years perfecting, all of it had been compromised by someone I probably knew, someone I'd worked with. I'll find them, I said. Be careful, Sarah. If they're willing to destroy the facility, they won't hesitate to eliminate you. I left the sub-basement and began making my way toward the main computer core. The building felt different now, more threatening. Every shadow could hide an enemy, every corner could be a trap. But I also felt something else, a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. This was my facility, my work, my responsibility. The people who'd dismissed me at Christmas dinner had no idea that their daughter and sister was about to risk her life to prevent a national security disaster. As I climbed the stairs toward the computer core, I thought about the contrast between tonight and last night. 24 hours ago, I'd been begging for recognition from people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient problem solver. Now, I was the only person who could prevent a catastrophic security breach. The difference was that these people, my colleagues, my team, my country, needed me for who I was, not what I could provide. They needed Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, not just someone to write checks and solve family problems. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, even if it might be the last place I'd ever be. The computer core was located on the second floor, behind 3 layers of security doors that I'd personally designed. As I approached the first checkpoint, I could hear voices coming from inside, low, professional. discussing technical specifications with the kind of casual expertise that told me these weren't random criminals. I pressed myself against the wall and listened. "Bridge, we need those encryption keys now," a male voice said. "The download is at 60%, but the core files are still locked." "I'm working on it," came the reply. A woman's voice, American accent. Familiar, but I couldn't place it. "The secondary protocols are more complex than I anticipated. Give me 5 more minutes." "We don't have 5 minutes. The reconnaissance team found Santos. They know we're here." "Then we accelerate the timeline, forget the peripheral data, focus on the communication protocols and the weapons research files." I felt my heart stop. Weapons research files. The facility wasn't just handling communication systems, it was housing classified information about advanced weapons development. If that data fell into the wrong hands, the consequences would be catastrophic. I activated my secure communicator and tried to reach Captain Martinez, but got only static. The facility's interference was blocking our radio signals. I was on my own. Doryland. Moving carefully, I made my way to the security office adjacent to the computer core. The door was unlocked, which surprised me until I realized why. Whoever Bridge was, they had legitimate access to this area. They weren't breaking in, they were letting the others in. The security office contained monitoring equipment for the entire facility. I could see the computer core through the reinforced window, and what I saw made my blood run cold. 4 people were working at the main terminals. 3 men in tactical gear, professionals who moved with military precision. And 1 woman in civilian clothes, sitting at the primary console, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she bypassed security protocols I'd spent months developing. I couldn't see her face clearly, but something about her posture, the way she held her shoulders, was familiar. She turned slightly, and I caught a glimpse of her profile. My world tilted. It was Dr. Rebecca Torres, the lead systems analyst who'd worked with me on the facility's design. Rebecca, who'd been my colleague for 3 years, who'd helped me troubleshoot the communication arrays, who'd attended my promotion ceremony last year. Rebecca, who'd been feeding classified information to enemy agents for months. I watched in horror as she accessed files that required the highest security clearance, files that contained information about military communication networks across the globe. She was systematically betraying everything we'd sworn to protect. "Bridge to control," she said into a secure radio. "We have a problem. The backup systems are active. Someone's restored partial communication capability." "How is that possible?" came the reply. "Hartwell and Kim. They must have escaped somehow. If they've contacted the outside world, we need to evacuate immediately." "Negative. Complete the download first. We've come too far to abort now." I realized this was my chance. While they were distracted by the communication issue, I could access the security system and try to lock them in. But I'd need to get to the primary control panel in the computer core itself. The ventilation system. I'd designed it myself, with maintenance access that bypassed the main security doors. It would be tight, uncomfortable, and dangerous, but it was the only way to get close to the computer core without being detected. I found the ventilation access panel and began working on the electronic lock. It took precious minutes to bypass the security, but finally, the panel opened. I crawled into the narrow maintenance shaft, my equipment bag slung across my back. The shaft was cramped and dark, barely wide enough for my shoulders. I followed the building's blueprints from memory, navigating through a maze of air ducts and electrical conduits. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, I reached the ventilation grate that opened into the computer core. Through the grate, I could see Rebecca and the 3 operatives working frantically. The download was at 85%, according to the monitor displays. They were almost finished. "Bridge, we have movement in the building," one of the operatives reported. "Multiple contacts, armed, moving toward this location." That would be Captain Martinez and his team. They'd found a way to reach the computer core, but they'd be walking into a trap. "Initiate lockdown protocol," Rebecca ordered. "Seal all access points. We need 10 more minutes." I watched as she activated the facility's emergency lockdown system. a system I designed to protect against exactly this kind of intrusion. The irony was devastating. My own security protocols were being used to facilitate the theft of classified information. But I knew something Rebecca didn't. The lockdown system had a manual override, accessible only from the maintenance level. It was a failsafe I'd insisted on during the design phase, in case the electronic systems were compromised. I carefully removed the ventilation grate and dropped silently into the computer core. The room was larger than it appeared from the security office, filled with rows of servers and monitoring equipment. The 4 intruders were focused on their terminals, unaware of my presence. Section to all. I made my way toward the manual override panel, moving between the server racks like a ghost. The panel was located behind the main computer array, hidden from view unless you knew exactly where to look. I was halfway there when one of the operatives turned and saw me. "Contact!" he shouted, raising his weapon. I dove behind a server rack as gunfire erupted in the computer core. Bullets ricocheted off metal surfaces, and I could hear the distinctive whine of electronics being damaged. "Stop shooting!" Rebecca screamed. "You'll damage the equipment." "Bridge, we have a security breach," the operative replied. "Armed hostile in the core." I used the chaos to reach the override panel. My hands shook as I entered the access code, but the system responded. The facility's lockdown began reversing, unsealing the security doors throughout the building. "What's happening?" Rebecca demanded. "The lockdown is disengaging." "Someone's accessed the manual override," another operative reported. "The system is compromised." I heard footsteps moving in my direction. They were trying to locate me among the server racks. I had maybe 30 seconds before they found my position. I activated my secure communicator and tried to reach Captain Martinez. This time, with the lockdown disengaged, I got through. "Martinez, this is Mitchell. I'm in the computer core. Multiple hostiles, armed and dangerous. The inside person is Dr. Rebecca Torres. Repeat, Dr. Rebecca Torres." "Copy that, Mitchell. We're en route to your position." "Negative, sir. They're expecting you." "There's another way. The emergency communication system on the roof. If you can reach it, you can call for immediate backup." "What about you?" I looked at the terminal displays. The download was at 92%. In a few minutes, these people would have everything they needed to compromise national security. "I'm going to stop the download," I said. "Mitchell, that's suicide. Get out of there." "Sir, this is my facility. These are my systems. If I don't stop them, no one can." I closed the communicator and began moving toward the main terminal. Rebecca was still at the primary console, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she tried to complete the download before backup arrived. "Dr. Torres," I called out, stepping into the open. She spun around, her face showing genuine surprise. "Sarah? What are you doing here?" "Stopping you. You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like treason." She stood up slowly, her hands visible. The 3 operatives had positioned themselves around the room, weapons trained on me, but they weren't shooting. They needed her to finish the download. "Sarah, listen to me," Rebecca said. "The research we've been doing here, the weapons development, the communication systems, it's not for defense. It's for offensive operations. Illegal operations. I'm trying to expose it. By selling classified information to foreign agents? By getting it to people who can stop it. Do you have any idea what this government is planning to do with the systems we've developed?" I kept my weapon trained on her, but I was listening. Rebecca had always been passionate about ethical technology use. She'd questioned some of the projects we'd worked on, worried about their potential misuse. "Even if that were true," I said, "this isn't the way to handle it. There are legal channels, proper procedures." "Legal channels?" She laughed bitterly. "Sarah, I tried that. I filed reports, requested reviews, followed every proper procedure. Do you know what happened? They buried the reports and transferred me to a different project. The only way to stop this is to make it public." "So you decided to betray your country?" "I decided to save it." The download counter reached 95%. Whatever Rebecca's motivations, she was about to hand over classified information that could endanger American lives. "Step away from the terminal," I ordered. "Sarah, please." You know me. We've worked together for 3 years. Do you really think I'm a traitor? I thought about the Rebecca I knew. Brilliant, dedicated, ethical. Someone who'd spent countless hours perfecting systems designed to protect American interests. Someone who'd been troubled by the moral implications of our work. But I also thought about the 3 missing researchers who'd been trapped in the facility. The security breach that had compromised months of classified work. The weapons research files that were about to be stolen. I think you're someone who's lost sight of the bigger picture, I said. Whatever problems you have with the research, this isn't the solution. It's the only solution, she said desperately. Sarah, they're planning to use our communication systems to coordinate attacks on civilian targets. Not military targets, civilian targets. I can't be part of that. The download reached 98%. Last warning, I said. Step away from the terminal. Rebecca looked at the screen, then at me, then at the operatives positioned around the room. I could see her weighing her options, calculating the odds of success. I'm sorry, Sarah, she said quietly, but I can't let you stop this. She spun back toward the terminal, her hands reaching for the keyboard. I had a split second to decide. Shoot my colleague and friend, or let her complete a download that could compromise national security. I made my choice. I didn't shoot Rebecca. Instead, I dove forward, tackling her away from the terminal just as her fingers reached the keyboard. We crashed into the server rack, the impact knocking the breath out of both of us. The download progress bar froze at 98%. Sarah, no! Rebecca screamed, struggling beneath me. The 3 operatives moved to intervene, but before they could reach us, the computer core's main door exploded inward. Captain Martinez and his team burst through, weapons raised, tactical lights cutting through the darkness. Federal agents, drop your weapons. The firefight that followed lasted less than 30 seconds. The operatives were professionals, but they were outnumbered and caught in a crossfire. When the shooting stopped, 2 of them were down, and the 3rd was wounded but alive. I helped Rebecca to her feet, my hands shaking from adrenaline. She looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and disappointment. You could have let me finish, she said quietly. You could have let the truth come out. That wasn't your choice to make, I replied. If you had concerns about the research, there were other ways to handle it. Captain Martinez approached us, his weapon still drawn. Dr. Torres, you're under arrest for espionage and treason. Wait, I said. I need to check something first. I moved to the main terminal and began examining the files Rebecca had been downloading. What I found made my blood run cold, but not for the reasons I'd expected. The files weren't just communication protocols and defensive systems. They were detailed plans for offensive cyber operations targeting civilian infrastructure in allied countries. Hospital networks, power grids, transportation systems, all of it designed to cause maximum disruption to civilian populations. Jesus Christ, I whispered. Sarah, you see it now, don't you? Rebecca said. This isn't about defense. This is about turning our own allies into enemies. I scrolled through more files, my horror growing with each document. The research we'd been conducting, the systems we'd been developing, were being weaponized in ways that violated every international treaty on cyber warfare. Captain Martinez, I said slowly, we need to contact Washington immediately. This facility isn't just housing classified research, it's housing evidence of illegal operations. What are you talking about? I turned the monitor toward him, showing him the files Rebecca had been trying to download. These are plans for cyber attacks on civilian targets in friendly nations. If this research is being used for offensive operations against non-combatants, we have a legal obligation to report it. Captain Martinez studied the screen, his expression growing more serious with each document. This is above my pay grade, Lieutenant Commander. We need to secure the facility and let the brass sort this out. That's exactly what I tried to do through proper channels, Rebecca said. I filed reports, requested investigations, followed every protocol. Do you know what happened? They classified my concerns and transferred me to a different project. I looked at her, remembering the conversations we'd had over the past year. Rebecca had been increasingly troubled by the direction of our research, asking questions about the ethical implications of our work. I'd dismissed her concerns as perfectionism, but now I realized she'd been trying to tell me something crucial. "How long have you known about this?" I asked. 6 months. I discovered the offensive operation files by accident while working on a routine security update. When I realized what they were planning, I tried to stop it from the inside. By committing treason? By documenting evidence of war crimes. Her voice was steady, but I could see tears in her eyes. "Sarah, they're planning to attack water treatment facilities in allied countries. Children will die. Hospitals will lose power. This isn't warfare, it's terrorism." I felt the weight of the decision crushing down on me. Everything I'd believed about our work, about the facility, about the mission I'd devoted my career to, was being called into question. "Even if that's true," I said, "selling classified information to foreign agents isn't the solution. You've compromised national security." "I've exposed a criminal conspiracy," she replied. "The people I've been working with aren't foreign agents. They're investigative journalists and human rights lawyers. They're trying to prevent a catastrophe." Captain Martinez stepped forward. "Dr. Torres, regardless of your motivations, you violated federal law. You're under arrest." As he began reading Rebecca her rights, I continued examining the files she'd been downloading. The more I read, the more disturbed I became. The research we'd been conducting had been systematically weaponized, turned into tools for offensive operations that would target civilian populations. But I also found something else. Evidence that the facility's true purpose had been hidden from most of the researchers, including myself. We'd been told we were developing defensive communication systems, but the real goal was to create weapons for cyber warfare. "Captain," I said, "we have a bigger problem. These files indicate that the facility's research has been compartmentalized. Most of the staff, including me, weren't told about the offensive applications." "What does that mean?" "It means we've been unknowingly participating in the development of weapons that violate international law." The implications were staggering. If the facility's research was being used for illegal operations, everyone involved could be held accountable. The career I'd built, the systems I'd designed, the expertise I'd developed, all of it could be tainted by association with war crimes. My secure communicator crackled to life. "Mitchell, this is Colonel Hayes. What's your status?" "Colonel, we've secured the facility and arrested the infiltrators. But there's a complication. The classified research here appears to be evidence of illegal offensive operations." There was a long pause. "Lieutenant Commander, you're to secure all files and await further instructions. Do not discuss this matter with anyone outside your immediate team, ma'am. If these files contain evidence of war crimes, we have a legal obligation to." "You have an obligation to follow orders, Lieutenant Commander. Secure the facility and await instructions." I looked at Rebecca, who was now in handcuffs but watching me intently. "Sarah, you see what's happening, don't you? They're going to cover this up. The evidence will disappear, the research will continue, and innocent people will die." "That's enough," Captain Martinez said. "Dr. Torres, you're entitled to remain silent." "But I won't remain silent," she replied. "Sarah, you know me. You know I'm not a traitor. You know I wouldn't betray my country unless I believed it was the only way to save it." I stared at her, remembering the colleague I'd worked with for 3 years. Rebecca had always been principled, ethical, someone who questioned the moral implications of our work. She'd been the one to insist on safeguards, to worry about potential misuse, to advocate for transparency. "The files you were downloading," I said, "where were they going?" "To a secure server maintained by the International Criminal Court. They have jurisdiction over war crimes, including cyber attacks on civilian infrastructure." "You were turning evidence over to an international court?" "I was trying to prevent a catastrophe. The operations planned for these systems would kill thousands of innocent people." I felt the moral foundation of my career shifting beneath me. Everything I'd believed about serving my country, about protecting American interests, was being complicated by the possibility that I'd been unknowingly contributing to plans that would harm innocent civilians. "Captain Martinez," I said, "we need to preserve all files in this facility. If there's evidence of criminal activity, it needs to be protected. My orders are to secure the facility and await instructions. Your orders don't override federal law. If we have evidence of war crimes, we're legally required to preserve it. Lieutenant Commander, I strongly advise you to reconsider your position." I looked around the computer core, at the servers containing years of research, at the woman who'd been my colleague and friend, at the men who'd followed orders without question. I thought about the oath I'd taken when I joined the military, the promise to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Captain, I'm invoking my authority as the senior technical officer for this facility. All files are to be preserved, pending a full investigation. Sarah, you don't understand what you're doing, he said quietly. This is bigger than you realize. People at the highest levels of government are involved in this research. Then people at the highest levels of government need to be held accountable. I turned to Rebecca. The journalists you've been working with. How do we contact them? Sarah, don't do this, Captain Martinez warned. You're throwing away your career. I'm trying to save it, I replied. I didn't spend 15 years serving my country just to become an accessory to war crimes. Rebecca gave me a secure phone number. They're expecting to hear from me. If I don't contact them within 24 hours, they'll publish everything they already have. What do they already have? Enough to expose the illegal operations, but not enough to stop them. I realized that I was facing the most important decision of my career. I could follow orders, preserve my rank and pension, and hope that someone else would take responsibility for the moral implications of our work. Or I could risk everything to prevent what might be a catastrophic violation of international law. I thought about my family, about the Christmas dinner where they dismissed me as unimportant. They had no idea that their daughter and sister was standing in a classified facility, holding evidence that could prevent the deaths of thousands of innocent people. For the first time in my adult life, I understood that being invisible to my family wasn't the real problem. The real problem was being visible to myself, knowing who I really was when faced with an impossible choice. Captain Martinez, I said, I'm going to make a secure call to Washington. I'm going to report what we found here, and I'm going to recommend a full investigation into the facility's research. Lieutenant Commander, that's career suicide. Maybe. But it's the right thing to do. I picked up the secure phone and began dialing. Outside, the storm was still raging, but inside the computer core, everything was crystal clear. I knew exactly who I was, and I knew exactly what I had to do. The secure phone call to Washington lasted 47 minutes. I spoke with 3 different officials, each one higher up the chain of command than the last. By the end of the conversation, I had authorization to preserve all files in the facility and recommendations for a full investigation by the Inspector General's office. Captain Martinez watched me with a mixture of respect and concern. You realize what you've just done, don't you? I've done my job, I replied. The job I swore an oath to do when I joined the military. Your job was to follow orders. My job was to defend the Constitution. Sometimes those two things conflict. 3 days later, I was sitting in a conference room at the Pentagon, facing a panel of senior officers and civilian officials. The investigation had moved faster than anyone expected, partly because Rebecca's evidence was so comprehensive, partly because the implications were so serious. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, the presiding officer said, your actions at the Colorado facility have been unusual. Yes, sir. You countermanded orders from your superior officer and made unauthorized contact with officials in Washington. I invoked my authority as the senior technical officer for the facility and reported potential criminal activity through proper channels. Proper channels would have been through your chain of command. My chain of command was compromised, sir. Captain Martinez was operating under orders that would have resulted in the destruction of evidence. The panel exchanged glances. I could see they were struggling with the implications of my testimony. I'd essentially accused senior military officials of attempting to cover up evidence of war crimes. The files you preserved, another officer said, they've been authenticated. The research at the facility was indeed being directed toward offensive operations against civilian targets. Yes, sir. Operations that would have violated international law. Yes, sir. And you believe Dr. Torres was attempting to prevent these operations? I chose my words carefully. I believe Dr. Torres was attempting to expose criminal activity through the only means available to her after proper channels failed. Are you defending her actions? I'm explaining her motivations, sir. Whether her actions were legally justified is for a court to decide. The questioning continued for 2 more hours. They asked about my relationship with Rebecca, about my knowledge of the facility's research, about my decision to contact Washington directly. I answered every question honestly, knowing that my career hung in the balance. Finally, the presiding officer dismissed me. Lieutenant Commander, you'll remain on administrative duty pending the completion of this investigation. That's all. I left the Pentagon not knowing whether I'd be court-martialed or commended. All I knew was that I'd done what I believed was right, regardless of the consequences. The consequences began the next morning. I was relieved of my duties at Wright-Patterson and reassigned to a desk job processing routine paperwork. My security clearance was suspended. My access to classified materials was revoked. Effectively, I was being punished for preventing what might have been a catastrophic violation of international law. But something interesting happened during those weeks of administrative limbo. I started receiving messages from other military personnel, people who'd heard about the investigation and wanted to share their own concerns about questionable operations they'd witnessed. A Navy cryptographer who'd been asked to develop systems for targeting civilian communication networks. An Army intelligence analyst who'd been ordered to plan operations against humanitarian aid organizations. An Air Force pilot who'd been briefed on missions that would have violated the Geneva Conventions. One by one, they came forward. People who'd been troubled by orders they'd received, who'd tried to raise concerns through proper channels, who'd been told to keep quiet and follow orders. I realized that Rebecca and I weren't isolated cases. There was a pattern of military personnel being asked to participate in operations that violated international law, and when they raised concerns, they were silenced or reassigned. The investigation expanded. Congressional hearings were called. The media began reporting on what they dubbed the Christmas Conspiracy, named after the date when the Colorado facility was compromised. Rebecca was released from custody after prosecutors determined that her actions, while technically illegal, had been motivated by a desire to prevent war crimes. She was granted whistleblower protection and became a key witness in the congressional hearings. I was called to testify before Congress 3 months later. The hearing room was packed with reporters, congressional staffers, and military officials. I'd never been in the spotlight like this before, never had so many people hanging on my every word. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, the committee chairman, said, "In your opinion, what would have happened if Dr. Torres had succeeded in downloading the files from the Colorado facility? The evidence of illegal operations would have been preserved, sir. The plans for cyber attacks on civilian infrastructure would have been exposed before they could be implemented." And what happened when she was prevented from downloading those files? The files were eventually preserved through official channels. The investigation proceeded, and the illegal operations were halted. But only after you intervened. Yes, sir? If you had followed your original orders, what would have happened? I took a deep breath. The evidence would have been classified and buried. The operations would have continued. Innocent people would have died. The hearing made national news. I was called a hero by some, a traitor by others. Military personnel debated whether I'd saved lives or violated the chain of command. Politicians argued about oversight and accountability, but the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. I was sitting in my apartment, watching the news coverage of the hearings, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed, "Mom." "Sarah?" Her voice was tentative, uncertain. I saw you on the news." "Yeah." I had no idea. "What you've been doing, what you've been working on. I never understood how important your job was." I felt tears starting to form. "It's okay, Mom." "No, it's not okay. We treated you like you were just the family bank account. We never asked about your work, never showed interest in your achievements. We made you feel invisible." "Mom." "Let me finish. I've been thinking about Christmas dinner, about how we acted. You came home to spend time with us, and we treated you like you were intruding. We took you for granted." I sat in silence, listening to my mother apologize for years of neglect. "I'm proud of you," she said finally. "Not just for what you did at that facility, but for the person you've become. You're stronger than any of us realized. Thank you. Can you forgive us? Can you forgive me?" I thought about the question. Could I forgive them for making me feel invisible? For treating me like a convenient problem solver rather than a family member? For dismissing my achievements and taking my sacrifices for granted? I can forgive you, I said. But things have to change. I can't go back to being the person who fixes everyone else's problems while being ignored. I understand. What can we do? Start by treating me like a person, not a bank account. Start by showing interest in my life, my work, my achievements. Start by including me in family decisions instead of just calling me when you need money. We can do that. We will do that. The conversation lasted an hour. We talked about the investigation, about my work, about the sacrifices I'd made over the years. For the first time in my adult life, my mother listened to me without interrupting, without dismissing my concerns, without asking for help. Taterai. Jessica called the next day. Then Tommy. Then Brad. Each conversation was different, but they all contained the same elements: apologies, recognition, and promises to do better. However, the irony wasn't lost on me. It had taken national media coverage for my own family to realize that I was more than just their financial safety net. But at least they were trying to make amends. The investigation concluded 6 months later. The illegal operations were permanently halted. Several senior officials were relieved of duty. New oversight procedures were implemented to prevent similar abuses. Hal was exonerated of any wrongdoing and restored to active duty. My security clearance was reinstated. I was offered a promotion and a new assignment developing ethical guidelines for military research. But more importantly, I learned something about myself. I learned that I didn't need other people's recognition to have value. I'd spent years trying to prove my worth to my family, trying to earn their acknowledgement through financial support and problem solving. The truth was, I'd always been valuable. I'd always been accomplished. I'd always been someone worth knowing and respecting. The problem wasn't that I lacked these qualities. The problem was that I'd been seeking validation from people who were too self-absorbed to recognize what was right in front of them. Standing in that computer core, deciding whether to follow orders or do what was right, I'd finally understood who I really was. Not the invisible family member who wrote checks and solved crises. Not the convenient problem solver who could be ignored until needed. I was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, expert in communication security, someone who'd risked her career to prevent war crimes, someone who'd stood up to authority when it mattered most. I was the person I'd always been meant to be. Last Christmas, I went home to Dayton. But this time, I was invited. This time, there was a place set for me at the table. This time, they asked about my work, my achievements, my life. And this time, when they offered to take a family photo, nobody asked me to hold the camera. They co-pull. I was in the picture, right where I belonged. But even if I hadn't been, even if they'd reverted to their old patterns, I would have been okay. Because I'd learned that the only recognition that really mattered was my own. I knew who I was. I knew what I'd accomplished. I knew what I was worth. And that was enough. Arenchea. It was more than enough. I.e. easier. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.